I'm glad you made it. Do you have anything fun planned for tomorrow?
Just taking my son trick-or-treating.
Well, that can be a lot of fun. My brother has just an absolutely horrible toy set up in his decorations. It's a spider that's about a foot across that's motion activated. So if somebody steps in front of it, it'll leap forward about a foot. And I don't like that.
Yeah, that's awful.
There are some pretty, I mean, like when I found out about, never liked spiders a lot, but when I found out about the crab spiders in the South Pacific that are nocturnal and climb
Mhm.
trees and eat coconuts by smashing them open, I thought, no, yeah, I don't like. They're crabs, but they're still arachnids, and that's more than enough.
Yeah.
And then I found out that in the Ivory Coast in Western Africa, there's a legend about, where we have Sasquatch here, they have spiders with bodies the size of dogs,
Awesome.
and which everybody thought just assumed was folklore until some Belgian uh, military guys fled the forest. There were only two survivors out of a unit of about 40 men, and because they said that their unit was attacked by giant spiders and eaten. I thought that's kind of disgusting.
Yeah.
So great thing for Halloween. Yay. Well, I wanted to see this one is a little bit long, so we're not going to watch the whole thing. Did ask people to keep things under 10 minutes, and this person, their PowerPoint presentation ended up being almost 9 minutes. So we're not going to watch the whole thing, but I did want to share it. The artist is another one of my favorite artists. Um, and so we're not going to see the whole thing, but this person, this is Carol Walker, and I don't know, I think she's pretty amazing. So this artist shows some of the work that Carol Walker does. She does these shadow puppet silhouettes, and sometimes they're really big, a lot of these. And this is one of her most famous works, um, the Sphinx that she did, a gigantic carving. These are people underneath there. And she did a fountain, the Fons Americanus. And some of the things that I like about Carol Walker is that she is very much, she's an artist who creates art that is very much from her own experience and history. And she is a very difficult person to come to if you're not going to be able to handle that. And I thought that this person did a really good job. This is Grace's. I thought she did a really good job uh, portraying Carol Walker's art. I think she is absolutely amazing. Um, One thing I did notice is that in the citations are not. Let's see, we're get to them. The citations are in alphabetical order, but they are not in correct MLA format. So they all need to be in correct MLA format with the accessed on date phrase at the end and remain in alphabetical order. And if this happens to you too, when you've done your PowerPoint and you didn't do them correctly, that is fine. You'll get the missing points if you put that into a separate document and just attach it to the assignment notes and conversation. And then, so you don't have to remake this. Oh, hi, we've got Christina and Madison with us. Hello, good to see you guys. So, and that one, we didn't watch the whole thing, but because it was almost 9 minutes long, but I was impressed with it. It is on our website, our YouTube channel. So please take a moment and go there when you can. And it should be right there. What I had promised last week is that I would grade everybody's carvings right away. And I did that with a few people. But then I thought it would be better if we did kind of a class critique. And I held off opening the paper mache module until tonight so we could talk about it. So before, I'm hoping that before people do the paper mache, they listen to this video. And I'll be grading those things like tonight, right after we talk, so that everybody knows what they need to do to get ready to apply the paper mache. And the paper mache module and the texture and light module are both open now for you guys to look at. So let me, I'm sorry, today, I don't know if anybody else has the same kind of thing every once in a while, but every once in a while, my internet goes all wonky. Like today, everything was working fine, and then 45 minutes, it was completely out. And then it worked fine again, and then it comes off and on. It seems to come off and on whenever it is the least convenient for me. But I wanted to go through the paper mache module really quick with you and show you what that's about. And then we'll dive into the color and light. Okay, one of the big things with the biomorphic carving, the biomorphic abstraction, is that it needs to look organic. It needs to feel smoothed, but it can't be like round and it can't be like a block. And we've talked about this several times. Sometimes people will go through and do the assignments before watching the videos for each module or for each week. And I hope you're not that kind of a person, because that just makes it really frustrating. This is an example of carving with the paper mache, because what we're going to be doing is making the paper mache in your kit. And everybody has in the kit, there's a container that has flour and glue in separate bags. And the way to make the paper mache is basically fill your container half full of water, put half the flour in, half the glue in, and mix that with your hands, but have gloves on your hands. And I would recommend highly using disposable gloves so you can throw them away. And when you mix it, you want to mix it carefully, and you want to get as much of the bubbles or lumps out as you possibly can. And then when you do the paper mache, you use those latex gloves again and put the paper into the glue mixture, squeegee it with your fingers into the glue mixture, which is why you want to use your gloves, and then apply it to the surface of your foam carving. And you'll see in these are really good examples of somebody who really made rounded edges and they used that foam block shape. So really an interesting form there. A couple things to be mindful of when you do the paper mache. Don't pour the leftover stuff down the drain. I would recommend getting like a leaf and garden size garbage sack, cutting the long edge and the bottom, or one long edge and the bottom, and then laying it flat. Then when you're all done, you can kind of fold it up to throw stuff away. And I would also recommend you do one layer, let it dry, which is usually going to be 12 hours to overnight. Then you're going to sand it down so it's smooth, do a second layer. After that dries completely, sand it and smooth until it's smooth again as well. And if you do this on your foam after your foam is all smooth and everything like that, it makes it 15 times easier. And I would recommend leaving the plastic sack out, leaving everything in place until you're all done. But whatever you don't use of your paper mache mixture after you're done with the first layer, put the lid on. Don't throw it away until you're all done with all the paper mache. I would recommend go through there. And then I also have um, a couple of videos. This gourmet paper mache guy does some really amazing stuff with the paper mache. And here I have a demonstration where I show you what I'm doing. And I did the carving and everything. And then right towards here is when I start doing the paper mache. So that's about about an hour mark or so. And I show you how to mix it, cutting the strips and everything, and then applying it. So go ahead and watch this, and you can see how to apply it onto your object. Now I was dumb in this, and I did not wear gloves. I had to clean up my rings, and I also got a lot of the little short hairs on the back of your fingers. They got stuck and they pulled out when I tried to clean it up. So it was, yeah, it was bad. So the last half an hour of this whole thing is just me doing the paper mache. Oh, I'm sorry, you guys didn't see any of that, did you? Duh. So I'm mixing the glue and the flour into the container that's just below camera and right there. And I show how to apply it. So definitely watch that. Again, it's the last half an hour of that demo. And then at the end, there's also a work log area for that as well. So before we go into the texture and light, I want to share with you the carvings, and we'll go through and I'll tell you what works and which doesn't in each of the carvings. And then as we do that, if you guys have questions, go ahead and ask them. Because while I'm doing the screen share, I can't see your hands, so just go ahead and ask your questions. Now, I think this one is really good. We talked about this last time. A couple of things I like about it is that they aren't all lined up on the same plane. You can kind of see with the shadowing that some of these balls are towards us, and like this one are bent away. The things I like about this is you don't see any of the original block, and the person spent a significant amount of time smoothing it out. So they did a really good job with that one for this assignment. Now this one, I really like the forms and the shapes in this one. Something that's like some of these edges are a little bit harsh and sharp. So I would recommend before doing the paper mache, try to smooth them out as much as possible, like right along here, as much as you can. But I think this person did an excellent job trying to avoid making it look like the block. So they did a great job. But I think that like along this edge here, that needs to be rounded from front to the bottom. And some of the other areas, like right here, looks a little bit sharp. And remember, we want to get rid of as much of that as we can. I think this is another really good example. Oh man, I wonder why it's not. Can you guys see the image or is it the screen black?
It's black.
Okay.
I could see it for a minute and then it went black.
Okay. Let's try this, see if it'll work. All right, you guys can see that?
Yeah.
Okay. A couple of things that I really like about this is that, again, the person, you do see a little bit of that front surface of the block, and that's fine because in this case, the person really rounded things as much as possible. Now, some of the foam, it's going to be just the way it's cast. It's going to be relatively easy to sand down. Others aren't. Areas like this with a little bit of fuzz, that you can compensate for when you do the paper mache. So this is a really good example of carving it, smoothing it, making it feel organic. So this is a great example of that. This one I think is a really good start. For this person, I'd recommend that before applying the paper mache, they just go at it with the sandpaper. They've done a really good job carving away a lot of stuff and getting a very interesting shape that does not feel like the block. But with the sandpaper now, they can go in like this area right here on the left, and where the top and the bottom curve into that front surface, and this area along here, and just sand those kinds of areas down so that they're smooth. Now, right in this, where this notch is taken out, I would not recommend trying to fill that in. I would recommend taking your sandpaper, sand on these edges, making it smooth so that this feels intentional. Smooth this whole thing up as much as you can and get these areas so that they feel really close to the way you want it to be when you're done. So this one is really excellent. It just looks like it needs to be sanded. This one is really well done. This person did do a really good job sanding it. It's kind of, it almost looks like AI because it is so smooth. But this looks like it's like that first one we looked at. This is uh, absolutely ready for the paper mache application. And when you start doing the paper mache strips, for these kinds of areas where you have like a hole in it or loops and things like that, what you want to do with the paper mache is make sure you tear your strips long enough to go from the front to the back to the front again. That way, when you soak it in the glue for a little bit and put it on, you can put one end of the strip in here, wrap it around to the back, pull it from the underneath up to the front, and then lay the ends over each other, and the glue will kind of hold it in place. And if you do that, that will make it a lot easier to paper mache these kinds of areas, stuff like that. So I would recommend, if you can see my mouse, don't do the paper mache along the edge like that. It'll make it really frustrating. Do the paper mache, at least the first layer, around front to back to make, and with the strips long enough so that the wet ends can overlap. That way the glue will hold on to itself. I really love this shape. I think it's looking great. For this person, this edge right here and this edge right here, they need to be rounded quite a bit more. So like this ball is beautifully done, but where we can see the sharp edge, we need to get rid of all that. We need to sand it down and smooth it so it feels rounded with the sandpaper. That will make it look a lot better and it will fit with the assignment better. It will follow the parameters of the assignment. So this person, I would recommend sanding these kind of sharp edges, like right here, so that they feel more like this area right here and the ball. The form itself, I really like the form. Like right through here, you can see where there's a sharp edge here and a sharp edge there. Round all that down so that it's smooth, and that will be much better. And again, when you do this and then turn it back in, I will update your grade. Now this, I really like the edge, and I think they've done a good job smoothing the edge, but this area is way too flat. And a way to compensate for that, or the way to correct for that, is I would recommend they sand these so that they're a lot more smooth. You see the sharp edge here, sharp edges there, sharp edge there. Sand all these protuberances so that they are smoother. And then as you do that, use the sandpaper to kind of, or use those forms to inform how you sand this down. And it might even be a good thing to not maybe dig a hole through it, but scoop this inside out so it's more like a dish, and then sand it smooth so that it comes out all the way, goes into the dish, it comes out again. Are my descriptions making sense to people?
Yes.
Okay, good. I think this one looks really good. I love the form, I love the shape. What I would recommend on this, it looks like this area is really beautifully done and finished, but I would recommend maybe sanding a bit more right there, and also sanding right through here. So because this feels a little bit too flat, feels like the front of the foam, and this edge is a little bit too sharp. So rounding this would really help and make this a lot better and fit better with the assignment. Can you see the difference between this area right here that's sanded and smooth and rounded, and this area down here? Can everybody see the difference?
Yeah.
Okay, then you know what I'm talking about, because this does not feel like it's done yet. This area does. I really like this. This gives me anxiety because I know how easy it is to break these. For this person, I would very, very, very carefully, like most of this looks like it's ready to go, but I would try to sand as much of this area as possible to get that to feel a little bit rounder. And this area right here looks like it's pretty round. This area is pretty sharp. So I just very carefully sand that as well as good as possible. And if you're afraid that it might break, do the best you can. Don't touch it anymore. But I think like right through here it can be sanded down in the center area without risk of breaking. Right through here it can be sanded, maybe a little bit here. This is beautifully done right through here. This is beautifully done right there. Can you guys see what I'm pointing at? What is smooth and what needs to be sanded a little bit on this one? Can you guys see that sharp edge there and the really nice rounded area here and right through here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I really like this one. This is another one that looks like it's about ready to go. I think this is really nicely done. Now on this, if you try, Whitney, are you here tonight?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you try sanding on the inside here? Because you got this really smooth out here, nicely done. Did you try sanding inside here?
Yeah, I did. It was really hard, and that bottom part of it is really thin, so I didn't want to go too hard because it was already
Right.
starting to break through.
Now, if that's the case, because I love how the object is smooth and rounded and everything like that. If that's the case, then when you do the paper mache, what you may have to do is like a partial layer in between the first and second layer. So you do the first layer, sand that will strengthen everything a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So you wrap it, and then if you do see those bumps and everything like that, you do a little bit more, or when do a partial batch with the paper mache with kind of crumple up the paper a bit, the newspaper, whatever you use, to kind of smooth that out, and then use glue on your fingers to slip with clay to kind of smooth it.
Okay.
And then after that dries, you can sand it down a little bit. And that will be a way to strengthen this and make it smoother if you're afraid that any more sanding is going to break it.
Okay. Thank you.
One thing that I've noticed, this particular mixture that we've made for you guys, it is about 4 times stronger than regular paper mache. With the wood glue, it is astounding. The particular wood glue that Jason found is makes it's not quite bulletproof, but you could use it as a self-defense um, weapon almost. This it becomes really sturdy. So that's what I would do. I would do the first layer, and then before you put your final layer on, do another partial layer that just fills in the areas that are bumpy. And then when you sand that down, you can do a final layer to finish everything up. I really like that shape. That's a good shape. Now I think this one is really kind of intriguing, and I think that this, like a couple of the other ones that we've seen, it has a really nice shape to it, but it needs to be sanded and smoothed out quite a bit more. Like we can see the sharp edge right along here on this little nubbin, and I would recommend maybe scooping this out a little bit more, but definitely sand it so it's quite a bit smoother before doing the paper mache, and then it'll work. But I'm impressed. Most of these are looking really good. Okay, now what kinds of things was I asking you to be aware of and to fix, and what kinds of things are really good to have from that little conversation? What do you remember from what we talked about?
Make sure we sand down the rough areas and avoid sharp lines in our work.
All right, great. And what are the areas that look really good?
Areas that are curved and rounded that have been smoothed out.
Yes, excellent, very good. Because remember, this is a biomorphic abstraction, so it should have that same kind of feeling that like a bone or plant roots or a burl have, things like that, where they don't have an awful lot of sharp edges. That's the kind of feeling we're going for. Now for our next module, and I'm going to share this really quick. Okay, so that the paper mache is right here. That's what we just talked about, introduction to paper mache, and I'm calling it the Mighty Voltron sculpture. Are any of you old enough to know who Voltron is? Voltron?
Yes.
it was it was a really fun Japanese inspired cartoon where it was a bunch of robots that would combine their powers and become one giant super robot. And that's why I want you to save your wire sculpture and stuff like that, because at the end, the last month of the class, we're I want you to be thinking about and putting together like a super sculpture where you'll tie in everything that you've been through and learned throughout the semester. And the next step is covering this carving with paper mache. We want to do that over the next week and a half. And then after that, we're going to apply the things we learned from color and texture and apply that to our sculpture, as well as work on the the conceptual pieces and the other in that module. And I will open up that module as well. Let's see. This is that module, contemporary processes and everything like that. I will go ahead and redo the dates and set that up for, or like tonight, so you guys can see what's coming next. But I don't want you to worry about that necessarily, because we'll start talking about it next week. But next week, we're going to be looking at paper mache, and we're going to be looking at the color and texture tiles. All right. And now I want to show you what this is. One thing that is really fascinating to me is I want to share. This is the introduction in the texture and light module, and I want to watch one of these videos with you guys and talk about it. If we can't, if the video watching doesn't show up in our YouTube channel for the class, go ahead and click on these and watch them when you get to this section. Pause this video and then watch these videos. Okay. There's a pause because I'm trying to get the video passed. Okay. All right, there we go. This is the video I want to share with you. Okay.
When we think of the ancient world, I think of Pompeian wall paintings that are brightly colored, of mosaics from the Greek world that are full of different colors. It was a world of technicolor. So what did sculpture look like in antiquity? Because when we walk through the hallowed halls of museums, we see all this white sculpture that looks somehow pristine, where in fact, marble sculptures and bronze sculptures in the classical world, that is in the Greek and Roman world, and of course also in the Assyrian world, also in the Egyptian world, were brightly colored.
And as it turns out, antiquity has a lot to teach us about our own values and who we've excluded from art history.
This idea that ancient sculpture was not painted started in the Renaissance. And there were some challenges to that as people started to pull sculpture up in the 18th and 19th century. But there were very important art historians, one in particular, Johann Winkelmann, who's often considered to be almost the founder of art history as a discipline. Johann Winkelmann liked his sculpture white and pure.
In fact, Winkelmann wrote, the whiter the body is, the more beautiful it is. And so we have the development of this connection between whiteness and ideas of purity, of nobility, and an association of those things specifically with Western culture.
And this is where we are so fortunate to have modern science and technology and the working together of archaeologists with conservationists and other types of material scientists to study the marble, to look for traces of paint, because we know when sculpture was pulled up from the ground that in fact painting survived on many of these sculptures. And so one of the statues we're looking at is a reconstruction of the so-called small Herculaneum woman from the island of Delos. And she was excavated in the late 19th century. And we actually have descriptions of how colorful she was when she came out of the ground.
So the first thing we should say is we can never reconstruct these sculptures with absolute certainty.
We absolutely know it was painted. How exactly the colors look, there's always a little bit of guesswork.
One of the things that the color does is it allows us to really understand her clothing.
And what we can see very clearly is that she's wearing silk. The silk is crinkling, as you can see down by her feet, and then she has this lovely mantle wrapped around her. She is the so-called small Herculaneum woman type because a statue almost identical to this was found at Herculaneum in about 1706.
This type of sculpture was very popular among the ancient Romans, who adopted so much of Greek culture as their own.
I believe there are 160 examples of this portrait type, both from the ancient Greek world and the ancient Roman world. In the ancient Roman world, you'd purchase the body and you'd have a separate head or portrait done, and that head would be put into the statue.
So now we're looking at a sculpture of a sphinx. And what's so wonderful is that in this gallery, we can compare it to the sculpture as it looks today and a plaster cast of it showing us how it would have looked on the original stele.
This is an archaic stele. Stele is a grave marker. That means this monument marked the grave of an individual. In all likelihood, the youth that it's depicted and possibly his younger sister who stands next to him. One of the things that's so remarkable about the stele is its preservation of color in both the stele and in the original Sphinx that stood on top of it. There is a lot of color surviving that is visible still to the naked eye. In the case of the stele, we can see a lot of red, but when we go up and look at the Sphinx closely, we can see that on the Sphinx's breast, there was a very detailed pattern that almost looks like scales, as if she was a bird or having feathers, and that we can even also start to see that pattern and decorating on her wing. It is clear that she was polychrome.
And so in this reconstruction, we see oranges and yellows and golds and blues, and not seeing the stone itself feels shocking.
If you think about this stele being erected in a graveyard, all those steles are competing for your attention. Having something bright, shining in gold meant that people walking by would look at your grave, look at your stele, and remember you.
We may not be looking at exactly what this sculpture looked like in antiquity, but in a way, art history is an attempt to understand these objects the way that they were originally intended to be seen. And we can only do that imperfectly.
But what we do have to acknowledge is that the aesthetic that we often ascribe to works of art as objects in museums, their audience would have seen them in antiquity in a different way and interacted with them in a different way. And that is a world that, by using science and technology, we can understand is part of the quote unquote Western tradition. We are a part of this larger conversation about art and color, and that we need to embrace those changes and rethink the way we look at art.
I really like that video for a number of reasons. How many of you feel that it's a little bit of a surprise to see that the coloring on these ancient sculptures?
I've seen those images before and was completely shocked the first time I learned that those had been painted bright colors. I always just assumed that they were white marble back then too.
Yeah, Winkelmann's voice was so prevalent that it's still difficult to challenge that assumption today. And of course, in 1712 was when the first publication to really espouse anti-black racism was published in the U.S. And Winkelmann in 1777, that he was very much part of that environment. And of course, intellectual elites wouldn't stoop to talk about such things necessarily, but it is interesting that he would say the whiter the marble, the more beautiful it is. What's fascinating to me too is as documents like journals and things like that emerge, dating back to the Renaissance, we find out that people who collected marble sculptures 700 years ago, 600 years ago, the workers that would find them in the fields and stuff like that would think that it was, the paint bubbling up was just gross and disgusting, and they would scrape it off because they thought it looked ugly. And not the paint itself, but the fact that it was decaying and bubbling and looking all gross. It was, I remember it was way back in the 80s and early 90s when people were realizing that if you looked really closely at these historical sculptures with microscopes, that the little flecks of paint in there were not haphazard or happenstance. That's how they would, by really closely looking at the surface of these sculptures, they could determine exactly which, or determine the exact chemical makeup of the pigments used. So they said, well, we can't know exactly what it looks like. That's absolutely true, but you can tell this area is blue, painted with a lapis-based blue. This part is yellow, painted with an oxidized silver yellow. Maybe not the exact shade, but you can tell because of the remnants of the flakes of paint that you see on a microscopic level. Have any of you heard of a guy named Severus Septimus?
No.
Severus Septimus was the founder of London. He was a Roman emperor, I believe 3rd century. And everybody assumed, of course, because his busts around London are all white marble, that he was Caucasian. He was actually born in Syria, and his wife came from, no, he was born in, what was the country that Muammar Gaddafi was over? Libya. Severus Septimus was actually born in Libya, and his wife was from Syria, and they were both Black African. And he was the founder of London. But they didn't discover his race because the records about him didn't seem to make sense, because everybody knew he was Caucasian, just like all the other Roman emperors that they assumed. But when they started looking at the oldest busts, he was painted with a darker skin tone. And then they realized, oh yeah, you look at his family history, and his family in Libya were under Roman occupation for generations, and gradually went up the ranks and became citizens, and then he became an emperor. So really a remarkable story. But stuff like that, the only way that that was verified was because of microscopic analysis and finding that there is a skin pigment, a skin colored pigment where the skin tone was darker. And then all the other records made a lot more sense when they realized that he was Black African. We don't, when we're doing with sculpture, I mean, from the beginning, the only other time we've talked about sculpture is in relation to, or not sculpture, but the only other time we've talked about things like texture and color is when we were talking about the house at the very beginning. With this module, what you need to, what we want to do is explore color and texture, and focus just on the color and just on the texture. And then when we apply it to our larger project, we'll figure out wild and crazy ways to use it. I think another thing that's interesting to me is I remember way back in the 90s, I saw an exhibit by a contemporary artist who was doing bronze sculpting with several different patinas, and I thought, bronze is supposed to be that dark brown. This is wrong. And then I realized, you look at that boxer, and that's a bronze, but he was painted, and you could see the blood, you could see his eyes, and that's how all those sculptures were. There weren't unpainted bronze busts of anybody until really after the Renaissance and into the Baroque era, when people were copying what they assumed the Greeks and the Romans had been doing. And it's sculpture that it's not just the Assyrians, the Egyptians, the Greeks and the Romans, the Etruscans painted their sculptures as well. It looks like the Maya did, which I think is really fascinating. There's a chance that the Ife or Yoruba may have painted theirs as well. It looks like they might have done that. And there's one of the problems, I think, that people assume sculptors didn't use paint and color is because 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years after the fact, the things that are applied on the surface are all going to be gone for the most part, or they're going to be decayed to the point where you have to get really specialty equipment in order to discover that there was any trace of a colorant that was on the surface. I just think when I first saw this, like Christina, I was really surprised to see how much color was used in the ancient world. And it's pretty much almost every culture, it seems, that made 3D art either chose material that naturally colored it, or it looks like there were many cases where they applied color as well, which I think is absolutely fascinating. I want to talk through the assignment with you guys, and please, as we go through it, feel free to ask questions. And when I do the screen share, I can't see your hands. So we just watched that video, but I want to share with you a couple things. This assignment, texture and color tiles, we are going to be making, and I'll scroll down and show you. We're going to be making these. Okay, so we have, you see there's, the assignment is to make a texture cube, and a color cube. And the texture cube is made up of 6 sides. This is the same cube, and the person took a photo, so you see 3 of the sides here and 3 of the sides here. And then the same is true of the color. You see 3 of the sides here and 3 of the sides here. And I'll make that a little bit bigger. And here the person took a photo where you have the texture cube next to the color cube. You see 3 of the sides of each here and 3 of the sides of each here. So the assignment is you're going to cut up the cardboard in your kit into 12 squares that are 4 inches by 4 inches. And on 6 of those squares, you're going to be developing textures. And on 6 of those squares, you're going to be developing color collages.
Sorry, I don't know if mine is frozen, but I only see smart history still. Like the video.
That is really odd. I think it is frozen.
I could see the color cube, so it might be your computer is frozen.
Good to know.
Because
Oh.
Is it working now?
Oh, but I'll just get out.
Okay, we are. So I want to so we're about 40 minutes in. Okay. 40, 50 minutes in, right around there. If you guys can't see this on the video that's recorded, we are looking at the texture and color tiles section of the module, the color and texture module. For this assignment, you're going to be making 12 tiles, 6 with texture and 6 with color. And there are some parameters. Like each of these tiles should take you about 45 minutes to do. And for the texture one, it can be really interesting after you build the whole thing to spray paint it all one solid color. Like with this, with the white and with the gold. Other people have done it where they spray painted the whole thing with black, but it forces you to see just the texture. And I'm talking in a broad overview right now, and then we're going to dive back in and talk about it a little bit tighter in just a second. For the color, all of you guys are professional artists. For the color, what you're doing is each of these tiles are going to be color collages. They need to each have at least 6 different pieces on them. Anything less than that is no good, because you need to spend the time to actually make these. So right here, this is only 3 pieces. This is only 4 pieces. This is only 4 pieces. These are not really good examples. Something like this is only 3 pieces of paper in the collage. That's not really a good example. Something like this, I think that these are good because they all have at least 6 pieces of paper in the collages, or something like this. And the reason why there is that restriction is you need to put in the time. So if we go back and we go in this a little bit tighter, what I want to do is talk about the texture first, and then we'll talk about the color. Right up here, I talk about going on a texture walk or a senses journey. And you can I would recommend doing this around your neighborhood and also doing this around where you live as well. And what you're going to be doing is you can listen to music that works really well, but you're going to be spending some time walking around just really focusing on the textures around you. And you will notice that you have a very different set of textures when you're outside in a park than you are when you're inside a building. Look at the textures and see what you can use. There may be textures that you see that you want to replicate, that you maybe like a bark of a tree, but you can't use directly. Maybe there's other ways that you can come up with a similar effect to get that texture. But there's also things that you might be able to harvest to use. Like, for example, I talk about small pebbles, grass, dry sticks, blowing weeds, bark, and peeling paint. Anything that involves not destroying a living plant or vandalizing anybody's property is what we're talking about. Those are fair game. And then we can also look on the inside of the house. There's going to be a lot of really interesting textures that you can either replicate or use as well, like dry cereal, buttons, paper clips, and maybe for a laundry basket. That's something that you could replicate. And a way to replicate that might be to, for example, get strips of the same kind of tag board that you used to make your house with a month ago, and maybe make a loose grid that would mimic the laundry basket, and then maybe attach that to something with a little bit of a spacer in between, so the person viewing that texture can see the shadow underneath. That might be a way of doing it. Terry cloth, you might be able to cut little pieces of terry cloth and make something with that and apply that for one of your texture tiles. But I want to show you how people have addressed this in the past. This is a really fun one that somebody did. All this texture comes just from the cardboard that they had. And what they did was they cut some strips of cardboard. They cut some blocks where they tore some of the pages, some of the outside edge off so you can see the corrugation. Some, they removed it completely. Some, they cut pattern areas out. And then they made a collage with that. This looks really fascinating. The texture comes from, you have 3 distinct colors of cardboard, but also the person has layered it up. And they've only at the very most have 3 layers, but it's fascinating to me how they've done stuff over and under. They've torn pieces off. They've cut through. They've layered on top of things, and it makes it for a very fascinating texture. And if you're doing this on the 4x4 tile, you'd probably only do like an area about this big that I'm outlining with the mouse. This is another way to create texture, where this person used a heavier tag board, and they made these volumetric shapes by not quite folding it. They actually cut the shapes out, but then they glued it along the edges or made tabs to glue it together. And it's fascinating because they've made a lot of these kind of almost pyramidal structures and other shapes and forms like that. But these are really interesting. Can you guys see these samples that I'm showing?
Yeah.
Okay, Melissa, can you see this?
Yes, I can see it. Yeah.
Okay. Then a third way to do it is this person took the corrugation and they carefully cut the top surface of the cardboard off so you can see the corrugated material underneath. And they've done several different ways. Here they tore it. Here they cut it in a very specific pattern. This can be really interesting and fascinating too. What I think would be really interesting is to use like a tag board or paper even, and maybe even make some shapes like this that you cut through that top surface so you can see the corrugation, and then do a complementary pattern, cutting out additional shapes out of the paper or tag board and gluing that on top. So you have a little bit of additional material adding to the texture. I think that could be really fascinating. And then this is my favorite out of all of them, because this person, each of these is only about 2.5 inches on a side. And what they did is they just made a whole bunch of different textures. And the overall, the whole thing is really interesting. And if you wanted to do something like this, you could do that, but like this would be one side of your cube. So you'd have 9 different textures rather. Or maybe make them a little bit bigger if they take more time and have 4 different textures on one side of your cube. But I think this is fascinating. So look at these really close and see what kind of ideas that can give you. Like here, they cut out 20 triangles and just overlap them almost like scales. That can be really interesting. And as we look at some of these, you can see this person took grass that they liberated when they were on their walk and glued it together. This looks like it's some really gauzy type fabric that they somehow were able to glue on, so it kept that kind of crinkle. And then when they spray painted it yellow, it added another layer of texture as the paint, the droplets kind of filled in between the warp and weft of the fabric. So that's a really fascinating one. And I don't know how they made this texture. That looks almost like grass. But here we see it looks like maybe they glued corn on here for that texture. Here they folded paper over so that you just see the creased edge towards you, and then wrap several things starting around the center in different layers and different kinds of paper as well to make this kind of straw-like feeling top of a spiral right there that I think is really interesting. And here they took, it almost looks like a thin metal or something, and maybe they used their fingers to crease it to get these kind of looping folds. But this is really fascinating. And then after making their cube, they spray painted the whole thing one solid color, so all you see is the texture. And I think that is really interesting. And here the person just glued the stuff right on and left it like that. Now I'll tell you, I don't think this is as successful as this. And I hope if I get them in this, I don't know if you can see the, yeah, we'll get them in the same frame. What is the difference between these two? What are a couple of the differences that you can see right away? Why would you think that I'm saying this is more successful than this?
The one that is spray painted uses the entire space of the, like the 4x4 face of the cube, whereas the other one doesn't fill the entire space.
Yes, exactly right. Very good. Each of these tiles are supposed to represent about 45 minutes of time. This does not look like it took 45 minutes of time. If you are aiming for an A and you like this kind of texture, what I would recommend would be layering grass evenly across the whole thing and then putting this texture on top of it. And you could even spray paint it in between to add another layer of texture to it. Then it becomes really a fascinating exploration of texture. Right here with the leaves, they just put a couple of leaves on. Thinking to yourself, how much, as a viewer of art, how much more interesting would it have been if this person had 40 or 50 leaves and they put a row of leaves on, then a row overlapping them most of the way, and just filled this whole cube up with very tightly packed overlapping leaves, so it felt like feathers almost, or it felt like scales on a fish. Wouldn't that be more interesting as a viewer?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. So that is one set, and you're doing 6 tiles that are exploration of texture. And I want you to go through this. I also want you to make sure before you start this, watch and look at all the background artists and see what they have to say. Read this assignment, look at the background artists, and then come back to work on this one. Now for the color part, the 3 people that are here tonight, what are your backgrounds? Are you guys all painters, graphic artists, digital painters, or what? Melissa, what kind of art do you do?
I mean, honestly, I don't. It's probably more just like photography. I do some graphic stuff.
Okay, so graphic art and photography.
Kind of all over the place. Yeah.
Okay, great. How about you, Whitney?
I do graphic design.
Okay. How about you, Christina?
I do watercolor and graphic design.
Okay. So all of you are very strong visual artists. You understand and appreciate the power that color can have. And what I collected here, there are, I don't know if this link works. Go through and see if you guys have better ideas for links, but I'll take you to one of the links and show you what this is. These links are each to different sites that are supposed to have a free use color wheel program where you can experiment with the color wheel there. And they all have stupid ads. And I don't know how to get rid of them all, but I picked them because they were free, not because they were ad free. Now, what I like about these is it gives each of these give you an option, and all of them are arranged differently, but they give you an option to go through several different ways, several different color schemes, and then to pick colors in the color wheel that they've provided. Now, their color schemes in our class, we generally just will look at 6 or 7, and you're very familiar with most of these. Complementary, that is like orange and blue, green and red, things on opposite sides of the color wheel. Monochromatic means it's different shades of the same color. Analogous means that they're colors that are really close to each other. Triadic means that there are 3 colors that are equally spaced across the color wheel. Like, for example, orange, green, and purple. Tetradic means that there are 4 colors picked across the color wheel. And tetradic can mean that you have 2 sets of what appear to be complements, or it could be a true tetradic, which means that they are separated by 90 degrees on the color wheel. Shades is very similar to monochromatic. There's also tints and neutrals, cold colors and warm colors. Now, what this color wheel does not show you is achromatic. Do you guys know what achromatic is?
It sounds like the opposite of chromatic.
Yeah, exactly. It's either white, gray, or black is achromatic. If it's going to be red or brown or blue, you just have different shades of that color, then it's monochromatic. And then there's also discordant, which means the colors are purposely chosen by the artist to be completely random. So if we go here and we choose, for example, let's do monochromatic. And then I can go up to this color wheel and I can just pick a color. I guess I have to move it. There we go. What this shows me around this rim are all the different shades that I can use in this monochromatic scheme that I picked out. This one gives you the hexadecimal color number for this particular thing. And you can do it all sorts of different ones. If we want to do something that's more interesting would be tetradic. And I can move these as to wherever I want so that they give me different colors. And then I can touch on each of them to get a, or maybe, yeah, here we go. This gives me the 4 different colors that fit in there. And then each of these also, this particular one will give me the hexadecimal values for each of these 4 colors. And I would say if you don't want to use any of the ones I provided, that will not hurt my feelings whatsoever. Just find a color wheel that will get you started. And some of them are free to use. Some of them you have to provide your email. Let's see. So here's analogous, which means they're really close to each other. Here's the basic color. We have red, kind of a maroon red, and then just a hint of red in the blue right here on either side of this one. And we can do the same thing with all the different colors that we want. Now for this, the color assignment, again, we have 6 tiles to work with. And for this assignment, you're going to pick out 3 color schemes, which is one scheme might be complementary, one might be monochromatic, maybe one is tetradic. And those are the 3 that I'm going to be using. Then for each of those 3, you're going to be picking 2 principal colors to start with. So for my tetradic, maybe the base color is this maroon, and then I will work with this for one of the collages, and then maybe I've chosen kind of an orange for the other one, or a yellow for the other one. But I'll have 2 tiles that are tetradic. Maybe 2 of the tiles are going to be complementary. So I have maybe this, maybe that for one of them, maybe that for another one. And then maybe 2 of them are going to be monochromatic, where I pick maybe purple for one and green for the other. So that gives me all 6 of my tiles. So again, that's 3 different color schemes, which are complementary, triadic, monochromatic, whatever. And for each of those 3 color schemes, you're going to have 2 versions with the principal color. So for example, if one of your color schemes is complementary, then one of the tiles is going to just have orange and blue, and the other tile is going to have red and green. And both of them are going to be complementary. Does that make sense so far? How you pick the colors?
Yes.
All right. Now, when you go to make this, these are supposed to be color collages. What that means is you're going to be all of you are artists, all of you are professionals. You're going to be making color collages that demonstrate your understanding of these colors. And you can make them out of magazines, or you can go to, I would recommend, if you're going to use paint samples from like a paint store, I would go to maybe 3 different paint stores, so you don't raid all the paint samples from one of the stores you go to. The reason I say that is because when I first started doing this, many of the students went to the paint counter at Walmart and cleaned them out. Took all the paint samples. So try not to do that. But when you do go to a store like Lowe's or Home Depot, get paint samples for the colors that you think you're going to be using, and then maybe a guidebook or 2, so you can tear out the pages and use those things too. You can also go to the Dollar Tree, which is really sad that it's now a $1.25 tree. But you can go there and get cheap magazines, go to DI, maybe raid somebody's closet and ask permission before you cut the magazines up. But you're going to be using images from the magazines that demonstrate the colors that you're looking for. And you can use that and paint chips and scraps of paper to create your color collages. And remember, what's the minimum number of pieces of paper in your collage?
6.
6, that's right. Each collage needs 6. The reason why I say that as well is I have had, believe it or not, a couple people cut a picture out of a magazine that just happened to have the complementary colors that they wanted, and they just left the picture as it was. And that's a really bad idea if you want to succeed in the class. So please don't feel like you need to do that. Now, are you guys feeling like you have a pretty good handle on what we're talking about? I said bring these to class. You have colors, textures, and colors to work with. We're not doing this in class. You're doing it at home, so you can disregard that line. But I want you to see what other people have done. If we look at this, would this be a good example or a bad example of a color collage? Would this be a good example or a bad example?
Those don't have enough colors to meet the parameters.
Right, they don't have enough pieces in them. Now, is this a good example or a bad example?
That one is a good example.
Yes, definitely. This has about, the person cut a whole bunch of little teeny triangles, and that works out. I think that this is a good example. I think something like this is a good example too. So there are good examples, but just keep in mind, and if you want to print out one of your own paintings to tear up, or one of your own photographs to use in something like this, and then tear it up and tear the printout up and everything like that, you can do that too. That's totally fine. If one of your own photos or paintings or some of your own work can be used, you can use that and cut it up for part of your collage as well. We have about 16 minutes left, and I wanted to go through, we're going to talk about more about this next week, of course, but I want to share with you some of the artists, just introduce you to a couple of them, and then I want to go over the quiz really fast. And if you guys would like, we'll go over the quiz again next time. Now, Louise Nevelson is really amazing. I don't know if you guys know who she is, but she had an apartment that was near a furniture plant, and she would go and raid all their wood cast-offs, and then she would make, you can see how big this thing is. This is a person standing in front of it. She would make these huge structures that are designed to go into, set against a wall, and they'd be made up of all these like shadow boxes, where she would put these cast-offs and scraps of lumber that she had found inside each of these shadow boxes, and then she'd paint the whole thing black or gray. And it made a really fascinating textural composition, some of them feeling almost like futuristic organs, or like facades of architectural temples, or just really fascinating stuff. Lee Montague does some really incredible things with stuff like sinew and hide, and doing things with cardboard and shellac, so that she texturized the cardboard so it would feel like it was dried leather. Really amazing stuff. Mark Lanigan is a fun one to watch. He does a lot of stuff with cardboard, where he'll make these textural collages just with the cardboard. And Ann Weber, I think we saw her last week. She uses strips of cardboard that she staples together, so her things are almost entirely textural using cardboard. And then my favorite out of all this set, I really love Louise Nevelson, but my favorite artist is Elan Tsui. What he does is he takes basically bottle caps and beer cans that have been thrown away, and he makes these incredibly gorgeous, sometimes 2- and 3-story tall tapestries by cutting out these bits of metal and having people sew them together essentially with copper wire, and then they mount them on walls. And it's fascinating because he takes the texture of the garbage metal, and through his process it transforms it so it looks like a gigantic blanket. And I think it's just astounding. So those are the artists that are for this week's for you to look at. And then here's the quiz, and we'll go through. Before we go to the quiz, do you folks have any questions at all about the stuff that we've been covering?
I do have a quick question on the color part of the cubes. So do we just pick two principal colors and then we mess with the type of color palette?
No, you start off by picking 3 different color schemes,
Okay.
and then for each of those color schemes, you pick 2 different sets of color.
Okay.
And so you can have 6 different colors as your primary colors, as long as 2 of them are for one color scheme, 2 of them are used in a second color scheme, and the last 2 are the base colors for your third color scheme. Does
Okay.
that help at all?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, good. Because if it makes it worse, I'm sorry. But I really hope that makes sense. Okay, here is what the quiz looks like for this time around. This first one is list 12 words you can use to describe texture. I think that let's see, we do have about we can do this really quick. Right here, I have 6 different textures that you can't use. This is difficult when you first get started, and if you're by yourself. So I would say with your family or with your friends or with your roommates, just take a couple minutes and start talking about textures and ask people to say textures. The first go around, everybody's going to be really hard pressed to figure out a texture, but then people are going to be saying more and more. And as an example, let's go around, each person here say one texture. I will start, and the texture I will pick is, I have to be different than ones here. I will say slimy.
I was totally going to say slimy. I'll go with spongy.
Spongy. Okay, great. Next person. Whitney or Melissa, just pick a texture.
I'm literally drawing a blank.
Well, and
Same.
this is why, yeah, this is why you need to do
Porous?
it.
I don't know.
What's that? You said porous?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Whitney, now you try. Describe something that's next to you.
I'm like, everything that's next to me is like smooth. Bubbly? I don't
Okay.
know.
Yeah, great. I'm going to say shiny. How about you, Christina?
Fluffy?
Fluffy? Good. Melissa?
Rough.
Rough. Excellent. Whitney?
Velvety?
Yes, excellent. See, already it's 10 times easier to come up with them. So you just cycle through with a group of people and collect maybe 20 or 30. And if there's some of the ones that are already on there, that's fine. But when you submit it, you're going to list 12 that are not, that do not include the 6 that are shown. I did this in a class. We spent 15 minutes on it. By the time we were done, the whole board was full of words. When the first time go around, everybody was drawing a blank. But as you do this, about the third time you go around, they're going to start coming out faster and faster and faster. Like burlap texture, sharp, prickly, scaly, bumpy, smooth, rough, shiny, bubbly, pimply, and hairy, furry, um, porcupine prickly, things like that, or slimy, snotty, sticky, gluey, gory, bloody, stinky. That's not really a texture, but do you see what I'm saying? It does get easier when you start listing these textures especially if you have somebody else to help you. And if any of you have an access to somebody who's under 10, they will come up with some of the awesomest textures. So next question, the traditional material used for casting a final product. What's the first thing you think of when you think of casting?
Bronze.
Yeah, that is traditionally the high water mark for culture's artistic endeavor. So like the Harappan civilization, nobody's ever found a temple or a cache of weapons, but people know that they were really civilized because they did do lost wax bronze casting 3,500 years ago. Amazing stuff. Would you say that artificial lighting has more control and is therefore more desirable for the artist in many cases?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. When you guys are put your work into a show, one of the first things you'll look for is where can I have the best lighting that shows my work off to advantage so somebody else can see the way I want it to be seen. Excellent. Is casting a simple and direct process? I think one of the things that we'll do is I would like everybody to go through, read the chapters, and let's go over and do the quiz again next week. Okay, but go through the quiz, look for the things that you're going to have to pick up in your reading, and then you go ahead and do the open book test. And next week we'll talk about the quiz again. Does that sound all right with you guys?
Yeah.
Okay. Now this question, I will guarantee you that the first try you're not going to spell it right. So when I go through and grade the quiz, I will give you the point, even though you when you make an honest attempt and you don't spell it right, I'll still give you the point. Okay. And here I think this is a good thing to talk about. Manipulation of the surface of an object to enhance its beauty is intimately bound to cultural and historical definitions of beauty. This is true for every culture. Can you guys come up with an example of how this is true? The first thing that comes to my mind is because I raised 5 daughters, there is this concept about making the skin appear artificial with makeup. And it's interesting to me because makeup is designed to accentuate the features that give you the most personal, that allow you to claim the most personal power. And but when my daughters first started using makeup and playing with it, uh, they thought first it was makeup was for entertaining, and then they thought makeup was for hiding. You know, like if you have areas of your skin you don't want people to see, you use makeup to hide it. And I think it's fascinating because you look at like movies today and TV and magazine covers, and the men and women that are portrayed are always lathered up with makeup. And it hides their natural features. And we're so used to that culturally that if you saw somebody on TV, for example, that didn't have makeup, they would look like they were dying because of the lighting that is being used. I think it's terrible. Can any of you think of other examples from, like, for example, other cultures?
Well, also with skin, we spend a lot of time removing hair from skin, places that it occurs naturally.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good one. Excellent. Anybody else? So for that question, you just need to find, demonstrate your understanding of the question using an example of your own. Then we also talk about use of different textures that are natural and artificial. And then the last question, you just need to reach into your bag of tricks with the tools of artistic critique and be able to talk about this in 4 to 5 sentences. How the person uses texture and the shape of the piece to express a mood. All right. So I wanted to go over it a little bit today, but let's talk about the quiz more in depth next week. And we'll talk more about your experiences with texture and stuff like that next week as well. And also see how people are coming along with your stories of paper mache. Again, I would highly recommend going to Dollar Tree, getting a couple pairs of really cheap gloves and using that. Otherwise, you'll be like me and peel all the little hairs off the back of your hand when you try to clean up with the glue. When you clean up with the paper mache, have paper towels set up that you can clean up with before you start. Because when you're done, you're going to wipe your hands off as much as you can with that, and you're trying to clean everything you can off of your hands before you use the sink. You don't want any of the glue to go down the sink. The reason is it will clog the sink like you would not believe. Try very hard not to do this in the sink. What I would recommend is either wipies or wet paper towels to get as much of this off your skin as possible. But if you're wearing the gloves, then that makes it really easy because you can just take off the gloves and throw them away. All right. Do you guys have any questions about what we talked about tonight? Do you feel confident in stepping forward with this next module?
Yeah.
All right, great. How about you, Melissa and Whitney? Any questions or observations?
No.
Yeah, I think I'm good.
Okay, excellent. Terrific. All right, hope you guys have a wonderful and safe Halloween tomorrow. Try not to get too frightened. And I look forward to seeing everybody next week.
Are you going to dress up?
I am going to be, we're going to be splitting up. My wife is going with the grandkids, and they have an awful lot of energy. So she is going to be helping corral them. And then I will be here at the house handing out candy to people.
Nice.
So I enjoy doing that. I like seeing when kids do their really creative costumes.
Yeah, that's fun. Well, have a good night.
Thanks. You guys
Thanks
too.
so much.
You have a fun week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. We'll see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.